It began like any ordinary afternoon at my downtown office in Brookside. I was buried in paperwork when suddenly my phone buzzed violently on the desk, my heart skipping a beat at the caller ID. It was my wife, Emily. Before I could even say hello, her voice burst through the line, frantic and trembling. "Alex, please help, they're dragging me out. I'm at Mom's wake, and security is literally pulling me away." For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind spun in disbelief. Surely there was some mistake. Who in their right mind would physically remove someone from their own mother's funeral? But the raw panic in Emily's voice told me everything I needed to know. Without hesitation, I dropped everything and raced out the door. When I arrived at my mother-in-law's home in the peaceful suburb of Brookside Hills, the scene before me was surreal. My wife Emily sat on the curb, tears streaming down her face, black funeral dress torn, mascara smudged by sobbing. She looked utterly devastated, her shoulders shaking in silent grief. Kneeling beside her, I gently wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly, reassuring her silently. Rage simmered within me, yet I kept my voice calm and steady as I asked softly, "Who did this?" Through tears, Emily looked up and pointed toward a woman standing arrogantly at the driveway's edge, clipboard in hand, high heels gleaming ominously, face a mask of cold indifference. It was clear who was responsible. Taking a deep breath, I rose slowly and approached the woman, my voice measured and deliberate, barely concealing the fury beneath. "Who authorized this?" I demanded, every word clear and sharp. Without missing a beat, the woman lifted her chin defiantly, a smug smirk forming on her lips as she declared proudly, "I did. HOA rules are rules." In that instant, it became painfully clear she had absolutely no idea who she was speaking to. You see, I'm Alex Donovan, the state attorney general. Normally, titles meant little to me. But at that moment, as my grieving wife sat humiliated on the sidewalk, I made a silent promise that this woman and the corrupt HOA she commanded would soon discover just how seriously I took justice. And as I guided Emily carefully into our car, quietly promising her that everything would be all right, a single thought resonated clearly in my mind. They'd picked the wrong family to mess with. To fully grasp the cruelty of what happened, we need to step back a few hours before Emily's desperate call, before the chaos erupted. It was supposed to be a simple, dignified farewell for Emily's beloved mother, Margaret, who'd passed peacefully just days earlier. She'd been a gentle woman who loved her garden, Sunday potlucks, and hosting neighbors for afternoon tea. All she wanted, in the end, was a quiet gathering to honor her memory. Nothing extravagant, just a humble wake at the home she'd cherished for decades. So, Emily arranged exactly that. A modest ceremony on Margaret's front lawn, beneath a simple white canopy. Just family, a few close friends, some sandwiches, and shared stories, a dignified send-off. But clearly, Emily hadn't accounted for the iron-fisted oversight of Carolyn Monroe, the infamous president of Brookside Hills HOA. Carolyn Monroe wasn't just any HOA president. She was the type who patrolled sidewalks with measuring tape, issued fines for grass blades she deemed too long, and once famously fined a neighbor for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of white. She had an unquenchable thirst for control, her power cemented by fear and petty bureaucracy. To Carolyn, Margaret's peaceful farewell gathering wasn't a solemn family event. It was an unauthorized social function, violating Section 7B of the community bylaws, labeled neatly as unapproved gatherings. As friends and family quietly paid their respects, Carolyn marched onto Margaret's lawn flanked by 2 security guards in mismatched polo shirts. Without hesitation, she loudly proclaimed the gathering illegal, citing HOA regulations. Confused and upset, Emily had politely tried to reason with her, explaining it was just a brief farewell. But Carolyn wasn't listening. "Rules are rules," Carolyn declared coldly, nodding to the guards. And in a moment Emily would never forget, the guards forcibly grabbed her arms, physically pulling her, still crying, from her own mother's property. It was humiliating, heartless, utterly unnecessary. And that simple act of cruelty, captured forever in Emily's anguished sobs and Carolyn's smug satisfaction, was about to become Carolyn Monroe's greatest mistake. Because little did she know, She had just crossed the wrong line, and I was determined to make sure she paid dearly for every single tear my wife had shed. When I finally reached Emily on that sidewalk, my heart shattered at the sight. She was trembling, her beautiful black funeral dress torn, her makeup streaked by tears, and her eyes reflecting shock and profound humiliation. The sheer cruelty of what Carolyn had done was evident in every painful sob that escaped my wife's lips. Gently kneeling beside her, I gathered Emily into my arms, softly brushing the tangled hair away from her tear-streaked face. Her fingers clung desperately to my jacket, as though holding on might ease the unbearable pain of losing her mother and enduring this heartless humiliation. Through her quiet sobs, she whispered, her voice breaking, "How? How could someone do this? Alex?" At Mom's own funeral, I had no answer, no immediate words that could heal such a deep wound. All I could offer was the warmth of my embrace, the steady assurance that she wasn't alone, and my quiet promise that the woman responsible would answer for her cruelty. In that vulnerable moment, amidst the chaos, Emily needed stability, not anger, not confrontation. I held her tightly, gently reassuring her, "We're going to make this right, I promise you." But even as I spoke those calming words, my eyes drifted upward to meet Carolyn's arrogant gaze. She stood confidently at the edge of the driveway, clipboard still in hand, unfazed by the anguish she had caused. Drawing a deep breath to steady myself, I gently helped Emily to her feet, whispering, "Let's get you home." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten or shout. But as we walked toward our car, my gaze locked onto Carolyn's, communicating something far more powerful than anger, an unspoken promise that she had no idea the storm that awaited her. In her smug certainty, Carolyn had underestimated me. But soon enough, she would learn exactly how seriously I took protecting my family, and how fiercely I fought when someone dared to hurt the people I loved. That night, as Emily finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, exhaustion etched deeply into her face, I sat alone at our kitchen table beneath the dim glow of my laptop screen. My anger had shifted into something colder, more deliberate determination. This wasn't simply revenge. This was justice. As the newly elected state attorney general, I had built my career meticulously dismantling corruption. Carolyn Monroe had no idea the storm she'd invited by humiliating my wife during her own mother's funeral. Now it was my turn to wield the law, quietly, methodically, and thoroughly. I began researching immediately, immersing myself into the tangled web of Brookside Hills' HOA bylaws, state regulations, and private property statutes. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. First, their own HOA bylaws clearly stipulated that any fines exceeding $500 required formal mediation. Carolyn hadn't bothered with mediation. She went straight to force. Second, no homeowners association in the state, Brookside Hills included, had legal authority to physically remove residents from private property without explicit consent or court order. Carolyn had blatantly violated that standard. But the real discovery was the third. Brookside Hills' so-called security team had no legal permits, no training certifications, nothing more than uniforms and badges bought online. Carolyn Monroe had essentially empowered private citizens to use physical force illegally. Each discovery deepened my resolve. Carolyn believed rules justified her actions, but she'd forgotten the most fundamental rule: no one is above the law. Yet, rather than storming into the next HOA meeting or confronting Carolyn publicly, something she'd surely enjoy, I chose a subtler path. Instead of immediate retaliation, I began quietly gathering evidence, setting traps, and patiently waiting for Carolyn's arrogance to lead her deeper into her own undoing. As dawn broke over Brookside Hills, I closed my laptop, knowing this quiet war had only just begun, but confident that justice, once set in motion, was unstoppable. Just as I was meticulously building my case against Carolyn Monroe and the Brookside Hills HOA, fate decided to deal me an unexpected card. Late one evening, a hesitant knock echoed at my front door, jolting me from my deep research. Opening it cautiously, I was surprised to see a familiar face. Robert Mitchell, the HOA's treasurer, stood nervously in the porch light, glancing anxiously over his shoulder. "Mr. Donovan," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, eyes darting nervously. "May I have a quick word?" Recognizing the importance of discretion, I nodded calmly, stepping aside to invite him in. Robert entered carefully, hesitantly, his face pale, hands trembling slightly as if burdened by an unbearable secret. "What's troubling you, Robert?" I asked softly, closing the door behind him. Taking a shaky breath, Robert met my gaze and confessed, "Something's deeply wrong within the HOA. The financial records, they don't add up. Carolyn, she's hiding something, and I believe it's serious." He proceeded cautiously, detailing suspicious expenditures, unexplained landscaping charges totaling thousands, equipment purchases without receipts, vague consulting fees paid to mysterious companies, and numerous payments authorized solely by Carolyn herself. He also revealed in hushed tones that he questioned Carolyn multiple times only to be silenced, threatened with removal from the board, and labeled a troublemaker. But the most alarming revelation came last. Leaning closer, Robert's voice shook slightly as he admitted, "Carolyn personally authorized those guards to physically remove your wife, sir. No board approval, no discussion, just her direct order." A chill went down my spine. This wasn't merely abuse of HOA regulations. This was blatant corruption and power gone dangerously unchecked. Robert, clearly terrified but determined to do the right thing, handed me a discreet folder filled with emails, financial documents, and handwritten notes. Everything I needed to prove Carolyn's wrongdoing beyond any doubt. As he stood to leave, Robert paused at the doorway, his expression grave yet hopeful. "Please, Mr. Donovan, make this right. For everyone she's hurt." After Robert slipped into the night, I closed the door slowly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Carolyn Monroe had believed herself untouchable, shielded by power and secrecy. But now, with Robert's courage and the evidence he'd entrusted to me, her carefully built empire was about to crumble, brick by deceitful brick. Armed with Robert's folder of damning evidence, I dove even deeper into the tangled web of Carolyn Monroe's corrupt empire. Documents spread across my dining room table painted a chilling portrait of an HOA gone rogue, led by a woman who believed rules applied only to those beneath her. Every page revealed new depths of deception: inflated invoices for non-existent landscaping projects, security upgrades that were little more than overpriced walkie-talkies, and thousands of dollars funneled into companies suspiciously tied to Carolyn's own relatives. Each discovery fueled my resolve, but my next move wasn't flashy. It wasn't public, at least not yet. Instead, it was precise and surgical. I quietly reached out to trusted colleagues, calling in favors earned through years of service as a state attorney general. I requested discreet audits of the HOA's financial records, careful reviews of their legal compliance status, and an anonymous tip to the state's Department of Nonprofit Oversight. Yet even as I quietly set these wheels in motion, Carolyn herself continued escalating tensions. One afternoon, Emily opened our mailbox to find a thick envelope, a formal HOA fine, a staggering $1,250 penalty labeled bluntly as unauthorized gathering violation. Emily's hands trembled as she showed it to me, her voice breaking. "Alex, have I really done something wrong? Is this somehow my fault?" That was the final straw. Carolyn had moved beyond mere cruelty into outright intimidation, and in her arrogance, she provided precisely the misstep I needed: a tangible, undeniable instance of harassment and procedural violations. I calmly reassured Emily, gently holding her close, promising her that everything would soon be resolved. But internally, my resolve hardened even further. Carolyn Monroe had been playing a ruthless game, betting heavily on fear and power. But now, she was playing against someone who knew exactly how to win this game, and she'd soon discover just how costly that mistake would be. While Carolyn Monroe continued believing she was untouchable, confident her power was absolute, I quietly set my next move into action. You see, unknown to Carolyn, one of the guests at Margaret's wake had discreetly recorded the entire shocking scene on their phone. It wasn't perfect footage, but it was clear enough to show Emily's anguish, the security guard's aggression, and Carolyn standing arrogantly, arms crossed, silently supervising the injustice. Instead of publicly confronting Carolyn myself, I anonymously shared the video online, posting it quietly on the local Brookside Hills community forum with a simple caption: "Brookside Hills HOA forcibly removes grieving daughter from her own mother's wake." Is this what our community stands for? The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire, quickly catching the attention of local news stations. Public outrage erupted as residents, both from Brookside Hills and beyond, expressed disgust and anger in hundreds of comments. This is horrifying. How could anyone be so heartless? Carolyn Monroe has gone too far this time. She needs to be stopped. My family has faced harassment too. Thank you for speaking out. And, perhaps most significantly, other Brookside Hills residents began sharing their own stories. Fines for trivial matters, threats of eviction over petty landscaping violations, and Carolyn's ruthless enforcement of arbitrary rules. Suddenly, the entire community found its voice, realizing they weren't alone in their frustration and anger. As the backlash mounted, Emily watched from our living room, a quiet strength returning to her eyes for the first time since her mother's funeral. She squeezed my hand gently, whispering softly, "People finally see Alex. They finally know the truth." Yet Carolyn still seemed unaware of the growing storm around her, or perhaps she simply believed herself immune to it. But soon, she'd realize that she wasn't facing just one angry resident or grieving daughter. She was facing an entire community, united in their demand for justice. And at the center of it all, silently guiding the storm, was me, waiting patiently for just the right moment to deliver the final blow. The public outrage was only the beginning. As Carolyn Monroe scrambled to maintain control of Brookside Hills, desperately attempting damage control through hastily arranged HOA meetings and carefully worded emails, I quietly set in motion the final stages of my legal strategy. With the community now fully aware of Carolyn's abuse of power, it was time for formal action. But I didn't rush or act impulsively. I knew, from years of legal experience, that true justice requires patience, precision, and undeniable proof. First came the carefully prepared subpoenas, quietly delivered to the HOA demanding all financial records, board communications, and meeting minutes. Then came the official notice from the Attorney General's office, signed not by me but by my trusted deputy, to avoid any appearance of conflict. The notice clearly stated the HOA was now under formal investigation for potential fraud, misappropriation of funds, and illegal enforcement practices. The effect was immediate and powerful. The HOA board members panicked. 2 resigned within days, publicly distancing themselves from Carolyn's leadership. Residents received official notifications, finally learning they were not legally obligated to pay Carolyn's absurd fines until the investigation concluded. And Carolyn herself? For the first time, her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Reports trickled back to me of emergency HOA meetings where Carolyn had erupted, blaming mysterious conspiracies and personal vendettas. But no matter how loudly she screamed, how fiercely she protested her innocence, the evidence was undeniable, and was piling up rapidly. At home, Emily quietly watched the events unfold, finding solace in the community's overwhelming support. Her initial despair transformed into quiet strength, seeing justice begin to tip the scales in our favor. Each day brought renewed hope, each revelation vindicating her quiet dignity amid the chaos. Yet, even with victory in sight, I refused to grow complacent. Carolyn was cornered, yes, but I knew her well enough by now to anticipate that she wouldn't surrender without a fight. I was ready. The courtroom was my arena, evidence my weapon, and justice my mission. Carolyn Monroe had started this battle, but I was the one who would end it. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Brookside residents filled every seat, their eyes fixed eagerly toward the front, waiting for justice that was long overdue. Carolyn Monroe sat stiffly beside her lawyer, clipboard nowhere to be seen, her once confident posture now visibly strained. When the judge called the room to order, I rose calmly, addressing the court with quiet authority. Your Honor, today we will prove beyond doubt that the Brookside Hills HOA, under Carolyn Monroe's leadership, has systematically abused its authority, harassed grieving families, misappropriated funds, and violated numerous state laws. As I presented the evidence piece by piece, financial discrepancies, forged contracts, unauthorized payments, and illegal enforcement actions, a hushed silence settled over the courtroom. Gasps filled the air as residents saw the truth revealed publicly for the first time. But the true moment of reckoning came when I played the video. The footage of Emily being forcibly removed from her mother's wake. Carolyn's face turned ghostly pale as her own voice echoed to the courtroom. "Rules are rules," she'd sneered, cold and indifferent, as my wife cried helplessly. The judge, visibly moved, leaned forward sharply. "Ms. Monroe, did you authorize this action without proper legal authority?" Carolyn hesitated, visibly shaken. Her lawyer whispered frantically, but it was too late. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom saw Carolyn for exactly who she was. A petty tyrant whose reign had finally collapsed beneath the weight of her own arrogance. The judge's voice resonated clearly, decisive and unwavering. "Given the overwhelming evidence presented, I am immediately suspending the Brookside Hills HOA pending full investigation. Additionally, Ms. Monroe, you'll face further review regarding potential criminal charges." Applause erupted spontaneously from residents, relief and gratitude flooding their faces. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand gently, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. Justice had finally been served. As we left the courtroom together, Carolyn Monroe sat frozen, alone, utterly defeated. Her empire had crumbled spectacularly, and everyone knew exactly who had brought it down. In the days following the courtroom drama, Brookside Hills underwent a profound transformation. With Carolyn Monroe removed from power and the corrupt HOA officially dissolved, neighbors who'd spent years living in fear finally breathed freely. The oppressive cloud of arbitrary rules and petty enforcement vanished almost overnight, replaced by warmth, unity, and genuine community spirit. Emily began to heal, slowly reclaiming her joy. Her mother's garden bloomed vibrantly again, flowers she tended with gentle care, becoming a living tribute to Margaret's memory. One peaceful afternoon, she invited close friends and family back to the house for a simple gathering, this time without fear or interference. The air was filled with laughter, stories, and bittersweet memories, a true farewell her mother deserved. For me, the victory wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring dignity and protecting the community we called home. Neighbors frequently stopped by, shaking my hand, thanking me with heartfelt sincerity. Each conversation reinforced the importance of standing firm against injustice, no matter the odds. One evening, as Emily and I sat quietly on the porch, watching the sunset wash gently over our neighborhood, I saw a car glide slowly past. The driver, a woman, posture rigid, hair neatly pulled back, paused briefly, her eyes scanning the street with a hint of longing, before driving silently away. Emily glanced at me curiously. "Was that?" "Perhaps," I answered softly, unbothered. "But it doesn't matter now. She has no power here." Emily smiled peacefully, resting her head against my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at ease, grateful for the peace we'd reclaimed, the justice we'd secured, and the community we'd strengthened together. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges life threw at us next, we'd face them united, stronger, wiser, and unwaveringly resilient.